In previous lecture, we learned how to make decisions using if, elif, and else ladder. These statements are useful whenever we need to check one or more conditions. However, there are many cases when we simply want to compare two things, and in that case, we generally use match case statements. For example, if we want to make a calculator in Python, so instead of using if else statements, we generally prefer to use match case statements. And another example is if we want to set a day of a week, or we want to search for a day of a week, we will generally be using match case statement instead of if else statement. And the reason is that match case statements are more readable, and unlike nesting in if else statements, they don't have much nesting, but they can do the work of nesting itself. So this was a brief introduction about match case statements. First of all, let me just tell you that to match something, we generally need something, that is, we need an expression to match. So let me just explain you with the help of comments. So assume that we have an expression that is outside the scope of match case statements, and we want to match that expression with different values. So we will do that using match case. So the syntax for match case is we will using match, then the quantity that we want to take as reference while matching other quantities. So in that case, the quantity is expression. Then we will using a colon to enter into the code block of match, and then we will be defining our cases. So we will be defining our first case, and then we will giving a value 1, then the code inside this value, that is, assume we want to print mm, the value 1 is equal to expression. Then we will be making the second case, that is value 2, and inside that value 2 we want to print that the value of this expression is equal to the value of second expression. And similarly, we can go up to n cases, and if the expression evaluates to be something else, then we will use a default case in this, and default case is generally denoted by an underscore. So unlike other programming languages where we use a default keyword for default case, we simply denote by underscore the default case in Python. And for this, we will write another code, that is no case match. So let me just give you another overview. So for match case statement, we generally need an expression that we want to match with other values. So we will be using this expression with the match keyword so that we can match it with other cases. Then we will be starting with the full colon, and this colon says that now you are inside the code scope of this match keyword. Then we will be defining our cases. So to define a case, the keyword is case. You will use a case keyword to define your cases. So first of all, we will be defining our case 1, and then we will enter inside the case 1. Then we will be telling what to do if the value matches the this value. That is, if the value matches the value of case 1, then what you need to do. Then we will define that part of code inside this case block. Then we will move to the next case, and the case two will work similarly, and we can place n cases in this match expression, and to make default case. And default case generally means that there is any other value other than these cases which the expression became after evaluation. So that value is default case, and it is denoted by underscore. So then we will be writing down the code of this default case in the last line. And please remember that this default case is not necessarily needed like the else statement in if else block. It is an optional piece of code. If you want to write it, or if you need it, you write it, and if you don't need it, don't write it. So this was a simple expression of match case statement in Python. So to save us time, I have already written a code snippet, which is actually nothing but you are taking a day number as an input from user, and you will actually be printing the day that is corresponding to that number. For example, the second day of week is Tuesday. So when you are going to enter 2 in the terminal, you will be getting Tuesday as the output in terminal. And similarly, the other cases of the week are written over here. And if the user enters any other number which is not in the range of 1 to 7, both inclusive, then the match statement will print a invalid day statement on the terminal. So let us run this code in the terminal to see how it works. Let me clear the terminal. Now I'm going to run this code, and you see it is asking me to enter a day from 1 to 7. Say I entered 1, it says Monday, and supposingly if I would have entered like 7, it would say Sunday, and if I would enter any other number other than numbers between 0 and I'm sorry, numbers between 1 and 7, it will give me a error. So I should not say error, it will give me invalid day. For example, if I enter minus 12, it will give me invalid day. And if I enter some other number like 67, it would again give me output invalid day. So this was all about match case statements. So I hope you would have understood how match case statement works in Python. But for your quick reference, there is a quick summary for a particular expression that you want to compare with some other expressions. Like in this example, you can see that I have created a variable day, and then I have written the code to take user input, that is should be an integer, and the range should be from 1 to 7. And when the number entered is 1, it matches it with this expression, and if it matches, then it simply prints this statement, and then it will skip all these statements like it was the same way in if else ladder. Similarly, if it found that this all these statements are not being matched, and this statement is being matched, that is the user entered a number 4, so it will simply execute up to here, and then it will not execute all these lines. And in the last case, if it found that all these cases other than the default case were executed and not matched, it will simply be executing the default case, and it will print the code inside default case, that is in this case invalid day. So now we will be writing another program to check whether the day entered by a user is a weekday, or it is a weekend, or it is neither. So let's do it. I will be creating a variable that is day, and I will actually comment this whole code out so that it creates no problem for us. Now I will be taking input and tell the user to enter the present day, then I will start a match case statement and I will be matching the expression day with our cases. So the first case will be I want to check if the day is uh, Monday, or let me just better make them lower cases so that there are no issues, or it is actually a Tuesday, or it is Wednesday, it is a Thursday, or whether it is a Friday. For all these cases, it should print that it is a weekday. And meanwhile, I just want to tell you that if you want to use or in match case statement, then you have to use or by this pipe symbol. You cannot simply use this or. And as you can already see that it has started giving me error. And the reason behind why we cannot use this or and we have to use o this pipeline symbol is simply because case statements generally expect you to enter a pattern, not a boolean value that they can compare. So what do I mean by a pattern is actually we will be covering patterns in regex part in our tutorials. So up to then you can understand a pattern to be a sequence of characters. I hope you should have probably read in your class 10th chapter that is sequence or series, and if not the chapter you would have probably read arithmetic progressions, that is AP in class 10. So that is a sequence. So those kind of sequence are actually matched by this case statements and not simple boolean values like true or false or any other value that is boolean. So this is the main reason why do we use a pipe instead of or. Now moving ahead to the next case, that is weekends. So if a day is Saturday, or it is a Sunday, in both of the cases it should print that it is weekend. And for every other misspelled character, or I should say a misspelled letter, or any other case that user enters something gibberish, it should actually say invalid day. So this was the simple code. Now we'll be running this code to check if it works or if it doesn't work. So let me just clear the terminal. Now many of you might be wondering that why is this error creeping into my terminal? So the reason is that I'm clicking a way too quick on this option so that this whole code is actually being run twice instead of a single time. So if I enter Monday, it says that it is a weekday. But you know what will happen if I entered Monday like this instead of Monday like this? So what do I mean that what if I made a character capital? So in that case, it will consider it like a default case, or I should say it will consider a default case, and it will say that this day is a invalid day, as you can see. And the reason is same because these case statements actually match the patterns. They will actually match for each and every character in that string. So a better way to do is to convert this string already to lowercase by using a lower method. So whatever the user is going to enter, it will automatically be converted to lowercase, and after they get it to lowercase, it will be easier for us to match these cases inside the match case statement. So let us rerun the code. So if I'm going to enter capital Monday, or even if I'm going to enter it like this, it will say that it is a weekday. And similarly, you can check for Sunday and Saturday. If I entered it like Saturday, or let me make T also capital, O also capital, so that it becomes even more better illustration. So you can say that the program works correctly, that it is a weekend. So this was all in examples, but here are some homework test cases for you that you can run on your system and practice. So the first case is you can build a basic calculator using match case statement. And let me give you a brief idea how you can do that. So here is a brief idea, and it is you just have to take two numbers as input from the user. I hope you know how to do that. You will be taking two numbers and particularly the float values as an input from the user. Then you will be taking another input, that is you will take input for the operation that user wants to operate. That is, he wants to do multiplication, addition, subtraction, or division, or what else he actually do want to operate. Then you will be taking input for this addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication, and then we will be using match case statement to match the operator, and then according to the operator we will be assigning the match case the code of the operation. For example, if the case is addition, then you will be writing inside case that print the sum of number 1 and number 2. This was as simple. And if all those cases fails, that the user enters something that is outside these operands. Let us include one more, that is exponentiation. So if the user enters something that is outside of these operands, we will be making a default case, that is this, and then we will be simply printing that this is an invalid operation. Let me just give you an overview how to do this. So you can build a simple calculator using the match case statement, and the idea is that you need to take two numbers and a operation that user want to perform between two numbers as a user input. Then you will be using match case statement to match the operand, and then we will be writing the code for that particular operand. And if the user has entered something that is not in these operands, or the operands that you will be putting in the case statement, then the default case will be executed, and the code inside the default case will be executed. In my case, I have given it invalid operation. You can give it anything else that you want of your choice. So this was all in match case statement. And if you want some other problems, here are some others too. But in these cases, I will be not providing you with any idea. So you need to think on your own and implement. So I have got four questions for you that you will practice, and you can check these answers online after you solve them. And this was all that I wanted to explain in match case expression statements. And now we will be heading towards loops in Python, and loops also come under the control flow statements. And in Python, we will be next beginning with for loops. So let me just make another file, that is for loop dot py under lecture 4. Let's put in lecture 4. I want to move it and we are ready to go. But before we move ahead to loops in Python, why do we simply need them? So the answer to this question is that there are a lot of times when we need to do some task repeatedly. For example, if I say that I need to print hello 100 times, then how will be you doing it? You will be simply copying the print statement and then copying it 100 times. That is massive. Or if you think that you can do this, then what if I said that do it a million times? Will you be able to do it? And if you say that still you can do it, I will increase the number simply to a billion times. Will you be able to do it without loops? And I know that some of you might say yes, but I know you are great programmers. You will be sitting on your chairs for a whole day and just copying this print hello statement in your terminals for a billion number of times. But there is a smart way too, and that is using loops. So loops in Python are basically of two types, and those are the for loop and the while loop. So in Python, we have two types of loop, and those are for loop and the while loop. So what is the difference between these two loops? So the difference is that we generally use for loops when we know that we want to do a task n number of times. For example, if we want to if we want to print hello world 100 number of times, so what we will be doing is we will simply tell the for loop that do this 100 times. We can also use while loop. There it works perfectly. There are no issues with the while loop. So the thing is, we generally use while loop when we don't know the number of iterations. That is, suppose we have taken user input that enter a number. Now, in this case, user might enter anything. We don't know what user is going to enter in the terminal. So it is better to use a while statement instead of a for loop statement. So now we will be starting with for loop syntax. So the basic syntax of for loop is we will be using a for loop. Then inside for loop comes the condition that you want to execute so that for loop runs until this condition becomes false, and then comes the code after a full colon. And remember, you actually need to give a tab space if you are writing the code in the next line, and if you are doing in the same line, then there is no need for tab space. So for example, I want to print numbers up to 10. So what I will be doing is I will simply use a variable I inside for loop. And let me just tell you one more thing, that we can actually directly use variables, those are not even declared in Python, inside for loops with range function. For example, if I want to print numbers in range of say 11, so I will be simply using a print statement and I will be printing I. So this statement should actually print I. Um, Let me just do it. Yeah, this statement will actually print I. Now, the reason why I deleted those parentheses is that if you are using this range function, then you don't generally need to use the parentheses with for statement. Now, if I want to run this statement, this piece of code, you will be able to see that Python prints the number from 0 to 10. And the reason behind is that this 11 is actually exclusive and range begins generally from 0. So when we are going to print the output of this for statement, it will begin from 0 and end up to 10 because this 11 is actually excluded. As you can see on my terminal, that numbers from 0 to 10 are printed. So the reason behind why it is printing these numbers from 0 to 10 instead of 11 is that this range function actually works like this. It will print 11 numbers starting from 0, not numbers up to 11. I hope you got it. If you didn't, just listen carefully. What I'm saying is that this range function will actually print 11 numbers, not numbers up to 11. If you are going to count down these numbers, that is from 0 to 10, you will probably find out that these are 11 numbers. You can just count them down. This is 1, this is 2, actually it should be like this is number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3, this is number 4, this is number 5, this is number 6, this is number 7, this is the 8th number, this is the ninth number, this is the 10th number, and this is the 11th number. So this was what I was trying to explaining. Sorry, this was what I was trying to explain to you earlier. I hope you would have surely got it now. A lot of teachers actually just say that this number is actually exclusive and range starts from 0. That is also, you can say, a way to explain. There are n number of ways to explain the same thing. So there are two parameters that the range function can actually accept, and the first one is the number of, that is, characters that it will print on the screen, and the second is step. I hope by this time you already know what do I mean by step. So range function actually accepts a total number of three parameters, or I should say total number of three arguments, and these arguments are the starting point, the starting point, the ending point, and the step. So if you want to use step in range function, then you will surely have to define these two arguments earlier. And if you did not give these two arguments earlier, then Python interpreter will get actually confused that whether this, let me just show you. Now, if I don't provide the range function with the knowledge that you are actually given this to be the last number, or I should say these are the total number of numbers that you should print, and this is the step value, it will not know that. How can it simply know that what I am trying to say without using the predefined syntax? It will simply not either not do anything or it will give an error. You can see that it simply does not do anything. So what we can do to solve this is we have to use the starting point and the ending point, and then we need to give the step value. So if I'm going to give the step value, then this range function will work like it will start from the first number, then skip the very second iteration, every second iteration. So the output should be like 1, 3, 5, that is all odd numbers up to 10. You can see that these are all odd numbers up to 10. Now, if I would have started it from 0 and used the step of 2, then it will be printing the even numbers up to 10, starting from 0. I can give it any starting value. The value can even be a negative value. You can see that it has printed all the negative as well as positive even numbers. But let us test if it can work for float values as well. So you can see that it actually cannot work with float values. It is giving a type error. Now we have discovered another error in Python, that is type error. So what do you mean by type error? Actually, in this reference, what this error wants to convey is that it is saying that you have entered a invalid type into this range function. Range function can only accept an integer value, not a float value, but you have given a float value, so you are receiving a type error. So this is the second error that we have discovered in Python after our first discovery, that was syntactical error. So this was the for loop with range function. Now you might be thinking that how is this working? So let me now give you an overview. So what will happen in this case is that this for loop will actually initialize a variable that you have defined over here. It is not necessarily be to I, it can actually be anything. It can be n, m, anything you want. The code will work perfectly fine. Let me just correct the starting and ending value. You can see that it is giving me odd numbers. So the variable need not to be I, it can be anything, and it will be initialized by this for loop syntax it well. This and it will be initialized by this for loop only, and this for loop will then make sure that it increases the value of this n every time it executes the print statement, or I should say instead, every time it executes the code inside its scope. Now you might be wondering what is scope. So the scope is actually the area, or I should say, area up to which a function can rule. That is, you can think it like in older times there used to be kings, and those kings had their own territory, and their rule only survived in their territories. They could not rule in others' territory. Now let's come back. In the same manner, every function has its own territory, and that territory is scope, and the scope ends once you stop giving a tab value after under that statement's starting condition. That is, you can take it like this: if I don't provide a tab value, this will give me an error. So this indentation actually helps Python to understand up to where the scope of this for loop will be working. For example, if I want to print something that is not a part of this for loop, I will simply not using a tab space, and I can print it like this, that for loops rule has ended. And when I'm going to run this, you will see that numbers from 1 to 11 are printed, and after that this statement will be executed only once. You can see that this statement is executed only once, and all those odd numbers are printed again on the terminal. What if I just give a tab space after this? Now what is going to happen is this print statement is now a part of for loops scope, and when I'm going to run this, then after every number it is going to print this statement. So for clarity, let me just change this statement and make it for loop executed one time. Now when I'm going to run this piece of code, this print statement will be printed up to those number of times up to which this for loop is actually executed. So let me just tell you in more illustrative way. What I want to say is that if this for loop executes 10 times, say, so this statement will be printed 10 times. And in this case, this for loop is only being executed 5 times. So this statement will actually run 5 times. You can see that this is one, this is the first, this is second, this is third, this is fourth, and this is fifth. So I hope it would be clear up to now how for loops basically works in Python. Now we will be working with conditioning and for loops in Python. But before, if there are any doubts, you can certainly rewind the lecture and watch it again. You are free to rewind. And we generally, in programming lectures, should rewind the lecture and should try to understand things again if they are unclear, because any doubt in your mind will actually hinder your performance in upcoming lectures. So that is a piece of suggestion for you. If you want to follow it, you can, and if you don't want, just ignore it like ignore other things. So now I will be illustrating you with how to use for loops in reverse order. That is, how to use for loops for printing numbers in reverse order. So to print numbers using for loop in reverse order, we will simply be using the negative stepping in for loops so that we can print the number in reverse order. So we're using the range function. Then we will be defining the range in which we actually want to print the numbers. So if we want to print the numbers from 11 and we want to go up to 1, and if I want to print numbers in reverse order, I will be using a negative step and I will print n. Now please give attention. So this 1 would actually be skipped and it will not be printed, because this, the last iteration, is always excluded while printing. So you can see that number from 11 to 2 have been printed on my terminal, and that too in the reverse order, that is from 11 to 2. Now I have illustrated you how you can use for loop and how you can use for loop in reverse order. Now for those who are actually having some prior knowledge of programming, I want to tell you that you can use for loop with lists also. For example, I have a list like my num, and in this list I have numbers up to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now what I can do is I can actually use a variable like num. So this num will actually refer to the numbers inside this list. So I will say for num in my num, and I will say print num. So this code will actually be executing this print statement up to 5 times, and each time it executes, it will do this it in this manner. So first of all, it will create this num variable, then it will relate this num variable with this list my num, then it will fetch the first number from this list, store it inside the variable number, then it will execute the code inside this for loops scope, and after that it has completed one iteration successfully, it will then move to the next iteration, then it will store this number inside this variable, and it will repeat the same piece of code that is written over here again, and it will do this up to the time where it reaches here, and finally it will execute it for the last time. And when there are no numbers to be executed, or I should say that when there is no item to be executed inside this list, it will simply exit the for loop. That is, the for loops rule will end. So when I'm going to run this program, you can see that each and every iteration of this list has been printed on the terminal. So actually I have not taught you lists in this tutorial yet, but I have already mentioned that for programmers to already know some programming, this example is for them. So if you did not understand anything, you are actually free to skip this part and not read this example. We will be discussing this example either again in tutorials later when we will be discussing list, or you can actually come back to this video later and watch this example then. So I actually have illustrated using lists only, but you can use other data types for iterating with for loop. You can, for example, use dictionary to iterate in for loop. You will just have to use two variables, one for key and the for the value pair of that key. But we will be skipping this part, and we will discuss it when we will be discussing the dictionary part in our tutorial. So this was almost everything that actually had to be covered in Python about for loops. And now I think that I should move to the next topic, that is while loops in Python. And this while loops are my personal favorite type of loops in Python. So we will be creating a new file, that is while.py, and inside this file I will be continuing with while loop. So while loop. So I have already discussed with you that while loop is used in those cases where we actually don't know the number of iterations that the loop might run with, and in those cases while loop is generally used. And it is generally a case where users actually gives an input, and we use that input for further actions in the code. So it is a journal case where while loops are used. Now moving towards the syntax of while loop, it is quite simple. So syntax is while, then you will be giving the condition, and then we will start the while loop, and inside the while loop we will be writing our code that will be executed until this condition inside the while loop is true. And once the condition becomes false, the while loop will terminate. For example, uh, let us print numbers from 1 to 5. And one more thing that I want you to know is that uh, this I while I in range don't works by default in Python for while loop. So if we're going to use this method that we actually implemented in for loops, then my dear friend, you will be in trouble because you won't actually be able to implement this code. As you can see that it says the name I is not defined. So, and it is giving you suggestion that if we mint ID. So we did not mean ID, but it is just a mere suggestion. So how while loops works are completely different from how for loop works. And this is the reason that we are getting an error over here. So I hope it must be clear up to now that we actually cannot initialize a variable unlike for loops while we are working with while loops. So to print this counting from 1 to 10, we actually will have to initialize a integer, I should say a number, um, and give it a value of 0. This is actually the value from which we want to start our counting. We can give it a value of 1 if we want to start counting from 1. And here comes the condition part. Like if I want to print the value of I, then I should actually write a condition like this, that if the value of I is less than equal to 5, then while loop would work, and if it is greater, then it will not work. Now you might be wondering that we will actually get 1 to 5 printed on our terminals, but actually no, we actually will not get the numbers 1 to 5 printed on our terminal. Instead, we are going to land in infinite loop. Now you can see over here that 1 is actually being continuously printed on my terminal, and I would actually like to warn you with these kinds of loop. These are actually known as infinite loops in programming languages, and they can actually crash your system if you keep them running for a very long time. And the reason is quite simple, because they will occupy a lot of space in the memory and eventually crashing the program and the system as well. So if you accidentally write a infinite loop, then the terminal shortcut to pose this kind of while, or I should say infinite loop, is to press control and then C on your terminals. So this will actually interrupt the terminal and it will halt the program that you are running. So as we have now started to talk about while loops, let us go into a bit more details. So you probably would have noticed up to now that what do you mean by while loops? So while loops are nothing but they are those loops in which this condition on which the while loop or any loop should exit never becomes false. So if the condition always remains true, the loop will never exit and it will eventually land becoming a infinite loop. So this is all about infinite loops, and there is not anything that you should be knowing other than this. And if you want to know something else other than what I have taught you in these 2 to 3 minutes, you can most probably go online and search for it. So now I will be telling you how we can actually print this I is equal to 1 to I is equal to 5. Many of you might even be wondering that we did not actually do anything else other than this code simply in case of for loop. Then why are we doing this in case of while loop? So the reason is because we simply cannot use the range function in while loop like we used in for loop. And the second reason is uh, that the range function actually increments the value of the iteration that we declared in for loop. Let me just come back to for loop once again. You can see that uh, here is a simple for loop with steps. Let me just remove the steps and come back to the conditioning. So what happened in case of for loop is that this range function actually starts the value from this very first iteration. Then it will increase the value by 1 and then next give it to the variable n, and then it will execute this statement. Then it will again increment the value, and then again it will assign it to this n, and then again the value will be printed until it reaches up to 10, that is this second index minus 1th value. Now you might be wondering that how do Python know that it has to increase the value by 1? So the reason is actually step. What Python does is it actually adds the value of this step into the very first index, and if nothing is given in the step attribute, then it is by default to be assumed as 1. So whenever we don't give any value in the step, that is automatically assumed to be 1 by the Python interpreter. And when we give it some other value, in that case, this step is actually added to the first index, and then the cycle goes on. So this is how range function actually works. Now coming back to while loop, we can actually see that there is no such code that is telling the while loop to actually increase the value every time it encounters an I. So in this case, we will actually have to do it manually. So to do this, we can actually use the concept of reassigning a variable its own value. That is, we can actually do this. Actually, we can go by this approach, or either we can use the assignment operator for the same purpose, that is this. So the choice is yours, and both of them works almost similarly. And when I'm going to run this piece of code, you will see that the terminal starts to print the value from 1 and goes up to 5. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yes. This happened because there is a logical error. Now, as we have encountered an logical error, let me just explain it to you over here that what do you mean by logical errors? So, logical errors are those errors that actually cause your program to behave in a different way that it actually was supposed to work. As you can see in this case, that I actually wanted to print the number from 1 to 5, but I eventually landed in printing these numbers from 2 to 6. And the reason behind that is quite simple. That is because Python actually reads the code by very first line and goes up to the very last line, and it also executes all those lines of code in the very same order that it read them. So this is the main reason that it gave me the numbers from 2 to 6 instead of 1 to 5. And let me just explain you using this code snippet. So what actually happened in this case is that Python interpreter saw that the value of I starts from 1, and as this condition is true, that is 1 is less than equal to 5, it read the next statement, which at that time, let me just comment out or delete this piece of code and uncomment it so that there is no confusion. So this code gives me an output that is this in the terminal. So what happened was I, which was initially 1, was less than this number, which is in the condition or predefined condition inside the while loop. So while loop successfully executed. Now what happened is the interpreter read the next line inside the while loop, and it saw that I has to be incremented by 1. So what it did is it simply increased the value of I by 1 and made it 2, which is, you can see it is over here. Then what it did is simply printed the value of I, that is 2. Then the value of 2 is assigned to this I, and you can see that it is still less than equal to 5. So what happened is the while loop's condition again become true, and it was again incremented to one more number, that is it became 3 now. Then 3 was printed in the same manner, 4 was printed, and in the same manner 5 was printed. Now the last case is quite interesting. What happened when the number became 5? When the number became 5, it saw that this number is actually equal to 5, not less than 5. It is equal to 5, and the condition is still true because I is equal to 5. Then it incremented the value by 1 again, and then printed the value that is on the terminal, that became 6. So when 6 entered the while loop again. That is when it compared the value inside I, that is 6, with 5. It found that 5 is not actually greater than 6. It is less than 6, and neither it is equal. So it simply terminated this while loop, and since there is no piece of code that is actually succeeding this while loop in the next few lines, as you can see on the screen, so the Python interpreter finds that there is nothing after this while loop, and so the program eventually quits. As you can see that nothing is being printed on my screen after this while loop. So this was the whole execution of this program, and I hope that you should be knowing by now how while loops works in Python. Let me just now print the numbers from 1 to 5 so that you can see how logic actually, if written in a wrong manner, can actually change the entire working of a program. You can now see that numbers from 1 to 5 are printed on my screen instead of 1, 2 to 6 as it was in the earlier case, and I hope you would be able to understand that how this program actually works, because I've already explained you a different version of the same program earlier. So this was the basic syntax of while loop. Now we will be solving a question, that is pattern printing, and we will now be printing a simple pattern of stars on our terminal. So the pattern is this. So this is the simple pattern, or I should say the simplest of patterns that you would have probably, or you would actually be printing using any kind of loop. So the syntax, or I should say the program, is quite simple, but I want you to try printing this simple pattern on your terminal before I start doing it. So you can simply pause the video and try it yourself. I hope you would have tried by now. So I will be printing this format first using for loop. So it is quite simple using for loop for I in range, that is from 1 to, I would like to go it to 4, or you can simply do it from like 0 to 4, 4, not 1 to 4. Then we will be printing this, then I, or I should say star, not I, star multiplied by I times. Now what will this code do is simply it will start execution of this code, and it will see that I starts from 0. So what will happen? It will print this star into I times, that is star into 0, and the terminal will return nothing, because something into 0 is a false, and false is generally not printed, and if it is printed then it is generally represented by 0. Then it will move to the next iteration, that is 1. It will simply multiply this string and with 1 and print it on the terminal. Then it will multiply it with 2, 3, 4, and finally the program will terminate. So let's see. You can see that the output has come. Also, the first line is complete white space, and the reason I have already told you that false is either not represented, and the representation of false is actually case dependent. That is, sometimes it is represented for particular cases, and those particular cases are actually predefined. So there is nothing that is going to happen unexpected in the code, like some of the C programming that you might see. But even in C, I should say there is nothing unexpected. There is one other way of doing this, that is you can run this code like this too. That is, it will run from 1 to 5, but in this case that empty white space line will not be printed on the terminal. Let's run this piece of code. You can see that there is no line that contains white space after this line, which was actually there initially. You can also do the same with while loops, like while I, let me just uncomment it out and bring it down. So yeah, while I is less than equal to 5, I should say 4 in this case, because equality holds true in this case. So just simply print this same piece of code. I actually did not tell the while loop to increment the value of I by 1 each time it goes through an iteration. So you will see that this star pattern is actually printed on my screen. Let me rerun the code. You can see that this star pattern has been successfully printed on our terminals.